Hello everyone watching us on the World Bank Facebook Live channel. We are coming to you from the World Bank Spring Meetings where thousands of development professionals, business and thought leaders from around the world are here this week and coming together to share knowledge and ideas to solve some of the world's most pressing development challenges. Do share any questions you may have with us in the comment section of this video. On behalf of the World Bank, I'm delighted to welcome Lady Lynn Forester De Rothschild, founder and CEO of the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism. Welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you here. And Lady Lynn, you are actually, in fact, just coming off of a very, very exciting panel with Jim Kim and other business and government leaders. So as a first question, I would like to ask you to share some of the key takeaways of that panel. The discussion was about how we unlock institutional investment for a sustainable world, and you had some fascinating thoughts and conversations.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here, and it was really nice to be on the panel. Dr. Kim opened with the challenge of how does the World Bank turbocharge the need in the developing world for capital to solve many of its most pressing problems. There's not enough development money, so can the capital markets answer that call? Then we had Minister Caputo talk about his desire for hosting the G20 meeting in November to focus on the private sector and infrastructure development. Then we had the Chief Investment Officer, Hiro Mizuno, from the Japanese pension, who manages $1.6 trillion on behalf of every man, woman, and child in Japan on a 100-year time frame, kind of changed the discussion. Because what he focused on was he as an investor needs to make long-term investments, but how do the capital markets respond to that need when they're so short-term oriented? And that is where I talked about the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, which is about 150 C-suite asset owners like Hero and sovereign wealth funds and pension funds from around the world, and the world's largest asset managers and the world's largest companies, about $32 trillion, to try to make the issues around sustainability, ESG, impact, not segregated into its own silo, but part of the capital markets. And I quoted Mike Bloomberg, who says often, you can't manage what you don't measure, and he's absolutely right. And so is Paul Polman right when Paul says, we measure what we treasure. And what do the capital markets measure right now? They measure what is your projected quarterly earning, and have you hit your projected number, and that's almost the end of the conversation. So we have quarterly earnings calls, when really the capital markets should look at how are you creating long-term value. So what we discussed was that the group of the coalition, with about 22 institutions and about $30 trillion of assets under management, are trying to create a measurement tool so that it's possible to look at how a company treats its employees, treats its supply chain, treats its community, with the intention of determining if and how that creates long-term value, and therefore investing in those companies. There's a bridge to Dr. Kim's concern about the intractable problems of the world, and the bridge there is the place I believe the World Bank plays, which is reducing risk enough so that the private sector can have an acceptable risk-adjusted return. And that's a a different issue from my concern that the entire capital market should be reformed to create value, to understand the value of these long-term companies doing the right thing.
So when you talk about, I wanted to ask you a little bit more to share your thoughts about this idea of measuring and measuring that you're creating value. So is data the problem, or what is the challenge?
So there's a lot of data, and it's all over the place. And institutional investors in particular have no real way of knowing the value of the data. So a portfolio manager will say, it matters to us if a company is better in its sector at keeping employees than its competitors, because that tells us the cost of recruitment will be lower, the cost of training will be lower, and we kind of believe a happy workforce produces better results. So, but then they say, but how do we really know? I mean, a company will report its employee engagement, and it will report scores from a survey. But everybody knows if the survey goes out and the number doesn't come back high enough, the HR department sends out another survey. And they might just do it the day after bonuses, or on a Friday before everybody's going for Christmas holiday. So rightfully, an asset manager or an owner is saying, well, how do we really know if that information is standardized? So that's why we're trying to create, standing on the shoulders of the many efforts that are out there to measure employee engagement, to measure lack of slavery in the supply chain, to take the many streams of data that are out there and put them into one coherent framework. And the analogy that you and I were talking about, because you can get lost, you can say, oh, we've been thinking about this for so long, everybody does it in different ways, it's never going to matter. Well, what I was saying was that before the Great Depression, that was true of financial information. Nobody knew, first of all, companies didn't have to release their revenue, release their costs, release their margins, release their profit. You didn't even have to talk about it. Then the Great Depression, there were a few really good companies that were doing it. And then when the Depression happened, the government said, we're going to require this. And there was a moment in time when the government might have become the auditing profession. But instead, more level heads got together, and the private sector was able to create GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. Now, if we're told a revenue number, we understand that. And we can compare the revenue of Coke to the revenue of Pepsi if that's what we want. But we can't right now, in a comparable, assurable, audited way, say Pepsi is better with water than Coke. They can say it. So that's what we're trying to create with all the people working in this area. And we're making progress.
That's a very interesting concept. So essentially, we are, if I may paraphrase you, looking to create the equivalent of a gap for how you measure value in terms of how a company is making an impact on sustainability. And you said there are a lot of people working on this. There are a lot of really valuable initiatives. Now, do you think that is there collaboration? Is there a way to bring all these groups together? Because people are focusing probably on slightly different priorities, slightly different perspectives. We saw today on the panel different views of how to achieve a common goal at different ways. Do you think, what can we do to bring all these groups to the table to have these conversations together?
It's a great question, and it's vital, because we'll never succeed if we have competing standards. Remember how bad that was remember video? You're probably too young, everything's been digital, but we used to have two different standards for videos, okay? And that didn't work out so well, so we just leapfrogged that and went completely to digital. So it's very important that we work with the standard setters around the world, that we work with the integrated reporting people, the focusing capital on the long term. All of these groups will have a say in what the final, I like that, gap for these issues will be.
And since we asked you to come here and share your perspectives, I think it's also fair to ask you, what would be your ask of the World Bank and our role in this?
Thank you. My ask of the World Bank, and I believe it's the same ask that President Kim is giving to all of you, is to use your convening power to talk to governments about the standards that they should impose. And I mean, governments can impose. We can't, but governments can. That they should impose on companies and investors to measure these activities that work on behalf of all stakeholders. I would ask you to do that. The second thing I would ask you to do, if I can be a little greedy, is to answer your mission is to alleviate poverty. That's not necessarily business's mission, or pension funds' mission, or sovereign wealth funds' mission. But I believe that if you can mitigate the loss, like you do through MIGA, MIGA is an incredibly important tool in achieving the alleviation of poverty. That if you can work with the capital markets to adjust the risk to be commensurate with the potential reward, then I think you'll see a lot more capital going toward your goal.
Wonderful. I think that is a great place to end. Lady Lynn, if you have any last comments you'd like to share, any last thoughts on this?
History has its eyes on us. We got to get this done. That's what I say.
That is a wonderful message to end on. So thank you so much for being here. It's been a privilege. I hope you have a good rest of your stay here in Washington. And for those of us watching us online, please keep watching this space throughout the week. We do have a number of other exciting speakers lined up, and they will be here, and you can join us here. Thank you.